Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Wednesday webinar, Social Security Disability for Breast Cancer. Before we go any further, I want to give our typical disclaimer, which is that today's webinar is not meant to be legal advice, but is instead meant to serve as additional background information for those individuals who are thinking about applying for Social Security disability benefits, and today specifically for those thinking about applying as it relates to a breast cancer diagnosis. I also want to mention that we do not take questions on the live webinar, and we do not really answer questions that are posed in the comments on the replay. And the reason for that is not because we don't want to help, but it's because we often need a lot of additional information that I don't really want you giving out to the general public. So what I do ask is if you have questions to please reach out to us. We will go ahead and drop a link in the chat where you can schedule a call. That link for the replay will be down below. And then if you wait until the end of the webinar, there will also be a slide that will have our phone number and email address if that is your preferred way to communicate as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to first talk about Social Security disability basics, then move into some guidance from the agency. We'll talk about Social Security listing 13.10, which is the listing for breast cancer. We'll talk about additional considerations and then why and how an attorney may be able to help you with your Social Security disability claim. A little bit about me. My name is Caitlin Wildoner. I'm the founding attorney of Beacon Disability PLLC, which is a law firm based in Florida where we exclusively practice federal administrative law. And we really focus on helping claimants with their Social Security disability cases from the initial application through to the Appeals Council. And we do handle both SSDI and SSI matters. All right, here are these are really the disability basics. As I just alluded to, there are two different Social Security disability programs. They both are going to require that you be disabled and unable to work for a period of at least 12 months. However, where they differ is SSDI is also going to require that you've worked and paid into the Social Security system for a certain amount of time before you become eligible for benefits. Generally, we say that you must have worked 5 of the last 10 years. There are additional requirements. And if you are a younger individual, particularly below or younger than age 26, you may not have had to have worked for 5 of the last 10 years, but instead they have kind of a reduced timeline requirement. For SSI, you don't have to have a work history of paying into the system, but you do have to have income and assets that are below the threshold set by the agency. The income threshold is a little bit more of not really a gray area, but there's a lot of variations because it depends on household size and total income. Asset restrictions is very black and white. You cannot have more than $2,000 in assets if you are single, and you cannot have more than $3,000 in assets if you are married. So those are the two differences. Now, notice how I said that you've got to be disabled and unable to work for a period of at least 12 months. That does not mean that you have to wait 12 months before applying. It just means that when you apply, you either have to have already been disabled for 12 months. Some people wait, 12 months or more because they think they're going to be able to return to work. And then they realize, 14 months down the road, okay, I haven't returned to work. It's not looking good. I might as well go ahead and apply now. And some people apply as soon as they realize, okay, I'm going to be out of work for a while, and it's probably going to be at least a year. So those are kind of, if you, as soon as you realize that you're going to be out of work for at least a year due to your physical and or mental impairments, that's when I would recommend applying for Social Security disability. There are certain cases, and breast cancer and cancers in general sometimes fall into this category where the agency will get your application and they'll say, okay, we got it. We're going to wait to evaluate your case for a few months, and we're going to see how you respond to treatment. And again, I've had situations of cancer patients and clients that do fall into that kind of category that Social Security uses as a wait and see approach. Okay, so that's also possible. If you apply within a month of getting the diagnosis, perhaps the agency may look at it and say, well, we're going to wait to see how you respond to treatment to see, is this going to last at least a year or more? or you can be back to work in 9 months. Okay. So those are the two programs. And then here's the 5-step evaluation process. When you initially file your application for either SSDI or SSI benefits, the very first thing before they get to this 5-step evaluation process is they're going to make sure you meet that secondary prong for SSDI, that you have sufficient number of work credits, and for SSI, that you have income and assets that are below their required thresholds. So that's kind of step 0 that they're going to check and make sure. As long as you meet that extra requirement for whichever program you applied for, or both, if you applied for both, then they'll move to this 5-step evaluation process, where they're going to first look to see, are you currently engaging in substantial gainful activity? And right now in 2023, that is defined as working 20 hours a week or more, or earning more than $1,470 a month. So if you're doing either of those, if you're working more than 20 hours a week, or you're earning more than $1,470 a month, the agency is going to look at that. They're going to say you're engaging in substantial gainful activity, and by our definition, cannot be found disabled. And they'll go ahead and deny your case at step 1. If you are not engaging in substantial gainful activity, they'll go to step 2, where they start to review your medical records to see, do you have one or more severe medically determinable impairments? If you don't have any severe impairments that are found in the medical records, they'll deny your case at step 2. They'll say you can't be found disabled according to our rules because you don't have any severe impairments. That's not their actual generic language, but that's what the decision will basically be. That's how they get to that decision. As long as you have at least one severe medically determinable impairment found in the medical records, they'll move to step 3, where they review the medical records for, do you meet or equal a listing? Is your severe impairment so severe that it meets or equals the listing? We'll talk about the breast cancer listing in just a minute. There are many other listings for many other conditions as well, but they tend to be a pretty high bar. If you do meet or equal a listing, the analysis will stop there and the agency will approve your case at step 3. If you don't meet or equal a listing, then they'll go to step 4, where they review they use your medical records to determine, what is your residual functional capacity? What is it that you are capable of performing on a day-to-day basis, even despite of your condition and your limitations? They use that residual functional capacity, or RFC, to determine, can you go back to your past relevant work, which is work that you've performed in the last 15 years, long enough to learn how to do the job. If an individual with your RFC can go back to your past relevant work, the agency is going to deny the case. They're going to say you can go back to work. You can go back to work as this job. And they will usually tell you what that job is that they're saying you can go back and perform. If you cannot go back to your past relevant work, they use that same RFC to see, okay, based on that RFC, your age, your education, are there other jobs that exist in the national economy that you can do in spite of, again, RFC, age, education? If so, they're going to say that you can adjust to other work. In a hearing decision, they'll actually outline what that other work is that they think you can adjust to. If you cannot go back to your past work and you cannot engage in any other work, that's where you can get an approval at step 5. Okay, so those, you could really only get an approval at step 3 or step 5. You either meet a listing or there's no such work available for you. Okay. When evaluating a case with a cancer diagnosis, here's what the agency is looking at. They want to know the origin of the cancer, the extent of the involvement, the duration, frequency, and response to the anti-cancer therapy. So as I said before, they may, and I've had them send letters before to clients that say, look, we're not going to review your case until, February, five months from now, 6 months from now, 4 months from now, whatever it is, to see response to the anti-cancer therapy. And they also want to know effects of any post-therapeutic residuals. Social Security will apply the listings to the cancer that originate from that specific site. Okay, so when we're talking about breast cancer, we're talking about this breast cancer listing, we're talking about cancer that originated from breast. As always, as we mentioned before, if you don't meet a listing, the agency is then going to evaluate your residual functional capacity and whether you have the residual functional capacity to engage in any other work in the national economy or any kind of substantial gainful activity. When it comes to medical records, here's what the agency is looking for when in cases that involve a cancer diagnosis. Again, they want medical evidence that specifies the type, extent, and site of the primary, recurrent, or metastatic lesion. If the primary site cannot be identified, then the agency will use evidence that documents the site of the metastases to evaluate the impairment under a different listing. They're also going to want any operative reports, including any pathology reports, and then any evidence that you have about recurrence, persistence, or progression of the cancer, any response to the therapy, and any significant residual impairments that you have as a result of the cancer and therapy. Oftentimes with breast cancer, we will see difficulties with using the arms, and that's a common kind of residual that will come into effect. So those kinds of things are important as well. When you have ongoing residuals, yes, you've gone through the therapy, yes, the cancer may be in remission or gone, but you still have significant residual impairments as a result of the cancer, the therapy, everything that you've been through, okay? Here's the breast cancer listing. I'll go ahead and leave it up for a moment. As you will see, there are 5 different ways to meet the listing, but it is still difficult. Just because you've got, let's say it's metastasized, as you'll see in 310B, they're going to want to see it metastasized to 10 or more axillary nodes or with distant metastasis. If it's recurrent, they're going to need to see, that medical records. However, if it's a local recurrence that eases up with anti-cancer therapy, that's not going to meet the listing. Okay. That doesn't mean that you're not disabled. It just means it's not going to meet the listing. And that then we've got an RFC argument that's going to need to be made that, okay, you might not meet the listing, but you still cannot go back to your past work or any other work that exists in the national economy. Okay. So here, like I said, here's the listing. I'm not going to go ahead and read through it. I touched upon 2 of the 5 ways, just to kind of give an idea of it's kind of a high bar. But again, just because you don't meet the listing does not mean you're not disabled. So here are additional considerations. As you can see, medical records are critical. And the issue, again, in Social Security cases is not just can you go back to your past work, but can you perform any job that exists in the national economy? If you're over age 50, the grid rules might come into play. And those are the rules that take into account your age, education, past work, transferable skills, things like that. Functional capacity can also be relevant, again, if you don't meet the listing. And I start and I end this slide with the same thing. Medical records are important, and particularly objective medical records. So any operative report, pathology report, really, as you're going through any kind of anti-cancer therapy, having the doctors be sure to notate in the chart what your functioning is like, can be really, really helpful. Not just, Miss Smith is here for her 3rd radiation appointment. Her next one is in 6 weeks, and that's it. It was administered starting at this time, stopped at this time, discharged at this time, but actually saying Miss Smith is here for her 3rd radiation appointment. She noted that after the last radiation appointment, this was happening. And, last week, this started happening again. Whatever it is, that can be really helpful. It's not objective, but having the doctor kind of relay it gives a little bit of extra credibility on top of you, of course, saying the same thing to the agency. Okay, here is how an attorney can help you. As I always say, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of the stuff that comes up time and time again. So we do provide guidance on what correspondence from Social Security actually means. If you are already a client of ours or you reach out to us in sufficient time after receiving a denial, we can help you file necessary appeals. We do review your medical records and case file, and we can discuss what additional records may be helpful in your case. It's not always possible to get those additional records, and we absolutely understand that. We do review your documents for accuracy and completeness, kind of like what I was just saying, if the doctor is telling you, when you go see them, some things, but it's not in the chart, we let you know that. And we said, look, I understand you and I believe you, but the doctor's not putting that in their notes. So if you can, next time you go, ask them to edit their notes, include that in the chart. We kind of had those conversations. Similarly, we do, in addition to providing the guidance on what correspondence means, we discuss what Social Security might be looking for in their requested forms. We don't ever fill them out for you, and the reason for that is because I personally view them as testimony without having to go before a judge. You know what you go through and you deal with on a daily basis better than anybody. So we do ask that you fill those forms out, but we'll provide some guidance on, what is Social Security getting at? Why are they asking these types of questions? And that can sometimes help you formulate your answers to best answer and give Social Security what they're really looking for in your particular situation. We work with you and the agency to provide relevant updates back and forth throughout the claim. If you have to go to hearing, we do prepare you for that hearing. And then we question you and any witnesses during that hearing. And really, I always say witnesses, and I always kind of try to remember to give this disclaimer, which is that we don't often have live family and friend, prior coworker witnesses in the hearing. And the reason for that is because the judges allot only a specific time for the hearing, and most judges want to hear directly from you. You are the claimant, you are the one living through this. And so we have different ways that we try to get family and friend testimony in. However, the other witnesses that are present may include a medical witness hired by the agency or a vocational witness hired by the agency. Medical witness is there to testify in response basically to the medical records as to whether or not you meet a listing, and if not, what they think your RFC is. And then the vocational witness is there to testify, to classify your past relevant work, and then to respond to hypotheticals posed by the judge and or your lawyer about whether a hypothetical individual with a hypothetical RFC can perform any jobs that exist in the national economy. Okay, so that is, like I said, that's not an exhaustive list. That's just some of the things that we can and do throughout cases to help our clients. As promised, here's our contact information, our phone number, our email address. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us on either of those avenues. We'll also go ahead and drop a link in the chat on the live now to schedule a call. And that link to schedule a call, if you would like, is going to be down below on the replay. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. Always happy to help in any way that we can. And if for some reason we can't, we do try to point you in the right direction of somebody who might be able to help. So thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.